This is a fairly simple little landscape with reflected water and foreground, midground, background. And I'm going to keep the color quite simple and just emphasize doing some washes and keeping the depth reading well. So I put a bit of a yellow wash first of all over the entire paper. I spritzed it first, then I put some yellow down, and then I lifted a bit of the yellow off up in the top of the sky and down at the bottom. The reason I did that is because I want to be able to do lift outs later, and I find that if I have a light wash of yellow down underneath, it's so light that you'll hardly notice that it's there. It will warm things up a little bit, but it'll make it possible to lift things out of a paper, even like Arches. This is 160-pound Arches watercolor paper. So I'm going to keep the colors very simple. I'm just using 4. I'm using a red, a yellow, a blue, and a green. So the red is alizarin crimson, and sometimes I use a little cad red. The yellow is cadmium yellow medium, or lemon. And the blue is ultramarine blue, and the green is viridian green. So it's just red, yellow, blue plus green. The reason I use viridian green and alizarin crimson in there is because they make very nice transparent looking watercolor darks, dark tones, even watercolor black. And I line up my palette so that I put the cool colors, the blue and the green, on one plate and the red and yellow on another plate. The right hand plate actually has all the colors on it, but normally it's just warms on one plate and cools on the other. And that way I can put another plate over the top. I'm just using styrofoam plates here, or plastic plates, and I can put another plate over the top and keep the paint moist if I so desire. So I'm using a 1-inch brush here, and I've speeded this up to roughly 2.5 times the normal speed. So mixing up a blue wash now, and I've spritzed the paper lightly. The reason I use 160-pound is partly because it's cheaper than 300-pound, but also because I tend to control the moisture quite a lot. I don't get the paper terribly wet. I do dampen the paper, humidify the paper at times, but I don't absolutely soak it. So here I put some blue at the top. It's just straight ultramarine blue, and I'm working it downwards, pulling it down towards the yellow wash, and you can kind of see a horizon or a margin of the lake running across as a line about a third of the way up. And I've sketched in a couple of land masses. Those are the other line work that you can see there. Then I put a little bit of alizarin crimson into the blue because I want the water to read as being a bit closer than the sky. So I use a slight tiny bit of warmth to differentiate. And I'm not going to smooth the water out as much as I have smoothed out the sky. I don't mind having some little horizontal streaks in the water. In fact, I'll be putting more in later. So I just smooth that out so I have a domed sky and a reverse domed water mass, and the light band across the middle is in the distance. So I hair dry this. So I hair dry about 3 or 4 times during a painting usually, and hair drying is a bit like doing a save on your computer. You kind of freeze things at a certain point and then you can work on top of it. So now I'm mixing up a color for the background. You can see a little sketch I did of this painting previously. And I need I'm going to work from far to near. So I take the blue and put a little bit of alizarin crimson in it. So that's going to still stay reasonably transparent. And now I'm aiming to put a band of faraway trees. And so the very first line is going to be on the margin of the lake, which is pretty nearly the horizon. So I'm putting that across. And I want to go a little beyond the middle to the left and right, but not too far because I don't want it to interfere with what I want to put in as closer land masses, as you'll see on the left and right. So here I'm indicating some tree forms in silhouette. Silhouette making is very important in watercolor. Being able to make the viewer read simple shapes. So I've eased it to the left and right, as you can see, lifted a bit out. And I'm also lifting a bit out. So I dampen my brush, I clean it off, dry it off a little bit, and then go up into the lighter area and pull back into the wash in order to create a bit of a misty glow in those trees in the background there. Okay, now I'm going to do the inverse of that, or the invert of it. And so I'm down in the water zone now, so I'm just going to do the same thing. I could vary that color down below. In some cases, lighting makes a reflection lighter than the thing reflected, in some cases darker. It's just kind of important that it be different in some way. And also I've made this a bit darker because I'm going to wipe some horizontal streaks across. Reflections are interesting things in marble floors, in glass, in mirrors, in the water. And they have certain components that you tend to utilize. First of all, there is a boundary to a reflection. So I've got a part of the boundary up there. The boundary indicates that there's a mirror surface. Secondly, you have the right side up reality, those trees in the background. Then you have the upside down reality, which tries to mimic it as far as the lumps and bumps go. And then you also want to have some sheen running across through the upside down reality in order to make the statement that, well, there's actually a surface there, and it's being reflected in a slightly imperfect surface. So other ways of showing the surface would be to put a floating log or a boat or something of that sort to indicate the existence of that mirror surface. So you've got the right side up reality, the upside down reality, the indication of where the mirror surface is, and then you often run some sheen lines across it, which you'll see me doing in just a moment here. So I've dampened a brush and I'm pulling paint out horizontally, and it often works best with a flat brush. So I'm running some darker streaks closer to me in that light area of the water, and then I'm lifting out some light streaks running across in the darker part of the reflection. Just reinforcing that. So darker wavelets, if you'd like to call them that, or wave lines or horizontals, and I'm deepening the water tone as it comes closer to the bottom of the picture, which is what I just did there. So I've introduced some streaks, and I'm thinking about perspective somewhat. In other words, the interval between the streaks and their size is different as you move back into the picture. And I don't want too many streaks. I want to just make the statement of the surface, and that's about it. You can put too many in, giving it a busy look. So now you can see I want to bring in a landmass on the left and on the right, and they're layered also. They work from far to near, and they have darker and lighter components. So I'm going to put in the landmass on the left first of all. So I'm using the red, the blue, and a bit of the viridian green in it to get a darker tone. I'm working mainly tonally here. Obviously you can use very pretty colors, but I'm just trying to keep it simple. So it's the out of my color choices, I have red, blue, and some viridian green. So that's alizarin crimson, ultramarine blue, and a touch of viridian green, which darkens it all. So I put in some tree masses. The deciduous tree masses are larger than they are in the far background, so I get the effect of diminution. That's repetitive objects that appear at different sizes, and that gives you some feeling of depth. And also I'm putting some evergreen trees in here. So I just edge print my brush and make some vertical spikes. And then I'm just using the corner of the brush to put in the branches. So I'm going to do the same thing at the bottom. Now notice that I dropped the shoreline down in relation to the shoreline in the far background, because position on a plane tells you also that you're moving back in the picture. So the shoreline position is lower and closer to us here than it was in the far background. So I'm being careful to reproduce down in the upside down world here of the reflection all of the features and the little spikes and jigs and jogs that I have in the upper portion. So it doesn't have to be exactly the same. I may explain reflections a little bit more thoroughly another time, but it doesn't have to be exactly the same. But you can't have, for example, a red tree up above a red evergreen in some way, or a red bush, and then not have it in the reflection down below. Even though that does sometimes happen, depending on what might be in front of it. But people expect the reflection to have a one-to-one relationship, so you give them what they're looking for. So I've begun now to put a layer on the right-hand side, and so I put a few deciduous lumps and bumps in, and then I brought some tree trunks up, and I'm putting some branches on them. You could use a rigger for this or whatever you like, but I'm just doing this fairly quickly. And the reason I'm putting in a branch structure is so that I can have some look-throughs through a tree that I'm about to paint there. So here goes the foliage masses. So it's important that you have a variety of sizes of foliage masses. It's important that they have an edge that suggests that the masses are made up of multiple leaves. So you have to have a jagged edge, secondly. The next thing is that you should have look-throughs, so areas of the tree where the foliage mass opens up and allows you to see the branch structure back inside. So that's why I was emphasizing a bit of branch structure there earlier. And then the last thing is you need some floaters. So you can see that I've actually put some leaves, clumps of leaves that are not even tied to the tree. They're floating out there in the sky on the left side of that tree. What that does is it makes the tree appear more diaphanous, more airy. Now I'm bringing a smaller tree out over the water, and I'm painting in a bit of a land mass or a shoreline down there. So I'm making the edge jagged. And I'm looking very much at the negative spaces. Negative spaces are extremely important in design of paintings and composition. And it's something that you get used to using more and more. You improve your ability. Main thing is to realize that negative spaces, the spaces that are between the objects of interest, are important. So here I've created another look-through. You can see there are some branches and trunks holding up that little tree that I've just painted. So now I'm going to start working on the right-hand shoreline. So I don't want to make it too flat. I want the edge to be undulating. I'm just doing that with my brush. And then I want to have it lift upwards so the land is sloping down towards the water. So I'm just putting in some cloud shadows or shadows from trees that you can't see. They're off on the right hand side of the picture. And out of those shadow lines come grasses, and they rise up the lower foreground there. So now I'm reproducing that little tree that that I just put in reflection. And I am reproducing it, and at the same time putting its dark reflective shape up against the shoreline to make it more dramatic. And then I'm putting in the reflected branches. And that's really why I put that tree there, so that I could create a feature and reflect the feature and create some visual interest right in that area. Focal point, if you like. So now I am taking the gleams, the little horizontal sheen reflections or sheens that I had cut through, and I cut them into the dark reflection on the right, and I'm also extending them into my reflection on the left. So I want to make them read. And then I'm just working over the land portion on the right a little bit. Now the area on the left is kind of boring at this point. It does read as far as depth goes, but what I'd like to do is actually create some warmth and some lighter shapes in front of that left-hand mass of foliage. So I'm thinking of dropping a bit of red and yellow in there, and kind of backing another layer into it. So I'm just using the red, blue, and alizarin crimson red, the ultramarine blue, and viridian green, just making it a little darker. And I'm actually putting in a darker layer now. I'm going to do the warmer stuff in just a moment. So it's another silhouette. Then I'm dropping in some pure yellow down below. And at this point I probably will put in a bit of red as well. And in this case I would use a cad red to drop into that area of foliage near the waterline. So now I'm reproducing the dark silhouette reflection down below. And I'm leaving the shoreline lighter because it's a horizontal surface and it would catch light more than the verticals of the trees, but also that's where you're going to get maybe a little bit of wave action, or you'll get some gravel or sand, or even the odd twig and log that would wash up. So I'm leaving that light streak across there. I could put rocks there or something later if I wanted to, but I don't think I will. So I'm dropping some red now and some yellow into that foreground part of that left-hand mass, and I'm going to dry it down a bit. Right now the red and yellow sort of reads, but I want to get some more definition into the lower understory bushes and so forth on that side. So I'm just drying it down so that I can work with it. I'm going to use a lift out method. I'm going to take some magazine paper, just paper, oops, I got a little spot there, caught it. And now that that's quite dark and a little dried off, I'm going to take a glossy magazine. I find travel brochures are good for this, but the very best are photography magazines and computer magazines, because they spend a lot of money on those publications. So I've just torn some holes, more of a tall hole there, and then a round hole to give me some possibilities for tree shapes. So I'm putting the roundish hole over the area, and then I've got a sponge that's slightly damp, and I'm lifting off the heavier color, but it's still going to have a bit of the reddish and a bit of the yellowish underneath it. It's not showing up quite as much as I want yet, but I'm developing the right side up and the upside down shapes by lifting them out. And if I lift out too much, I'll just drag my brush across it and push those shapes back. I want to get that area brighter than that, but on the right hand side now I can do the same thing. Just lift out a few little masses there. So now I want to brighten those things up, so I get some cad yellow, which is going to be slightly opaque, and drop some of that in. So whatever happens above happens below in the reflection on the left there. So I've got a point brush now, and I'm just putting a few trunks in on those small trees, and I'm going to drop them down and drop some shadows underneath them onto the shoreline. Then I'm emphasizing that little bit of shoreline with a dark line, the part that's tending towards us. And then I'm going to dump some of the same color into the shadow streaks and draw some grasses, which are large near the foreground and smaller as they go back. So here I'm putting some dark trunks into the trees on the left. So right now those two areas aren't very bright, they aren't very sparkly, and I'd like them to be more sparkly. So I dry this down now so that I can work on top of it. And then I'm checking those little gleams, the sheens rather, and lifting them out through the dark reflection on the left and right, getting them fairly bright. I could have left that till a later stage. It might have been a good idea. I'll probably have to touch those up anyway. And dry it all down. So now I get some white opaque paint, and what I'm using actually is FW white acrylic ink. So it's acrylic paint at an ink grade. It'll flow, and it's still very opaque even though it's flowing. So in this case I could use a brush with that, but I've decided to just show another little technique. That pen is a speedball italic pen with kind of a flat end on it for lettering in italics. So I'm drawing in some birches. So whatever I do above, I'm going to do below, and make them lean a bit so that the reflection's a little different from the upright reality. So they will create little sparkles up against the dark trees. So some of the trunks and branches in those little trees are darker than the background, and some of them are lighter than the background. That's a play on the figure-ground relationship. And then I'm softening the tips of those branches at the top, the trunks and the branches. And you do that because it makes them seem like they are protruding into the leaf mass. They become sort of fuzzy at the top edge. If you leave them at a hard stop at the top, what happens is they will tend to look as if they were a dead tree in front of the green foliage. But if you soften the top edge, then they seem to be fitting into the foliage at the top. So I've put little bits of white trunks there, and I'm pretty much finished. So I'm just stripping it off, and you're going to see a close-up of the final painting. Hope you've enjoyed this, and I hope it kind of inspires you to try it yourself.